I am director of Minnesota Sea Grant, and I have only been director of Minnesota Sea Grant for about a year and a quarter. So it's been a really exciting time getting to know what we do here. Before that, I was at Iowa State University, and I got to know Bob and Steve there, and Alan and a variety of others. And so I've been involved in fisheries issues and aquaculture issues, but my main science is I'm a limnologist, biogeochemist. But I don't hesitate to dabble in a variety of other things. So Sea Grant itself, Minnesota Sea Grant, Sea Grant's been supplying water expertise for 50 years this year. And in fact, this guy that you see there invented the concept of Sea Grant, and his office was about 2 blocks from here. So Sea Grant itself was invented in Minnesota as a concept, and in fact, Sea Grant was proposed as a concept at American Fisheries Society meeting in downtown Minneapolis about 52 years ago, something like that. And ever since the Sea Grant program was created, we've been trying to supply these the kinds of answers that people need, and this workshop is an outgrowth of that mission. I want to tell you a bit about Minnesota Sea Grant and what it does. This is Minnesota Sea Grant here in the middle, and we work on a whole bunch of different kinds of things. Sharon, can I go over there? Is it okay if I? Yeah, okay. What's that? Oh, nope. That one. I can't move far. Hold on. Well, that's dead. Is there anyone who has trouble hearing me? No. Great. Okay, this is Minnesota Sea Grant right here in the middle, and we do all kinds of things. We work with... Let's see if there's a switch. Yeah, I looked for it, Sean, but I didn't find it, but it's all right. We work with transport and trade, invasive species, obviously over here, fisheries and aquaculture, tributary stormwater, all kinds of different things. And one of our major jobs is to supply money to the research community to do science. So out of our $1.2 million allocation, which we hope is federal allocation, we hope will continue for many years into the future, although it's a little bit shaky at this moment, we give about $750,000 a year to research in order to create the science that people need. We also work with 32 other Sea Grant programs. You can't see it, the screen's not really big, but there are 32 other programs. We work with NOAA. We bring that expertise and that money to bear on the problems that our stakeholders need solved. And the kinds of stakeholders we have are youth and educators, public extension, education. We also work a lot with business and industry. We're part of the Department of Commerce. We work with agencies and managers and government and policymakers. So anybody who needs water science, we try to fund it, create it, get it to them in a form that they can use, and that's where this kind of workshop comes from. Oh, there we go. In fact, one of the stimuli for this workshop was that the Sea Grant program alone, not including NOAA Aquaculture, gives out about $10 to $15 million annually in aquaculture research funds, and I felt that Minnesota Sea Grant had been kind of leaving a lot of this money on the table, and I wanted to see if there was some way we could tap into those sources in order to create the science that that a growing industry needs. This is our one-pager, and it just says that we do all kinds of wonderful things. We create jobs, we create businesses, we generate science that generates capital and a variety of other things like that. We give about a 10-fold return on investment on the federal investment. That's my advertisement for why you should try to support Sea Grant continuing into the future. Minnesota Sea Grant is supposed to work on this coast here. That's why we have a Sea Grant here, is that we are a coastal program. But on the other hand, because we receive a terrific subsidy from Minnesota also, because we're a cooperative program, we work all over the state. This is our sort of new GIS map showing these little speckles are places where Minnesota Sea Grant has had an impact around the state. So we're busy helping. Notice we tend to like to spend a lot of time in the Twin Cities. That's a surprise. Also up along the coast, but everywhere else, basically from north to south. helping with various issues dealing with water. We work basically wherever we're needed. At Minnesota Sea Grant, we want to help Minnesota grow a food fish aquaculture industry that is a bunch of things, and Don has reviewed these already. It needs, Carol mentioned, it should be profitable. It's a really good idea to make money if you're going to be an industry. It should be efficient. It should be environmentally neutral or positive, because we have a very strong commitment to those goals. It should be innovative, sustainable, and responsible. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to accentuate in this workshop. Now, aquaculture and aquaponics are part of the growing local foods mix that Don was talking about, and this is a growing industry, a growing movement in the United States. This is just a graph showing the number of farmers markets in the United States and how they've grown over time, stopping up at about 2014. The University of Minnesota also has a wonderful resource on local foods, and I'm going to try and open that and crash the entire system here. See if I can. Absolutely not. Oh yeah, maybe I can. And I don't know if you've seen this resource, but the University of Minnesota and generally in extension is very keen on local foods, and you can go through this and I can't do it. If you can click on all these little icons over here when you get to this website, and you can see the distribution of local food suppliers across the state. The point I wanted to make with this is there are no suppliers, local suppliers listed on here, local suppliers of fish or aquaculture or aquaponics. And I think one outcome we could have from this workshop would be to integrate aquaculture and aquaponics into this local foods network. I seem to be, now I've destroyed the system, you guys. Hang on. See if I can actually get back to this. Speakers should never try to do anything fancy. Well, I can't do this. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm back. Yeah. Okay, so growing, very much growing in the local foods. And there was a great report commissioned by the McKnight Foundation on local foods. And this gives some indication of why people want local food. And generally, it's thought that local foods, well, this was a statistic I found unbelievable, is the average travel distance of food to the Midwest U.S. is 1,500 miles for a food resource. It's an incredible thing to me, and if you think about the carbon implications of bringing our food that distance, it's amazing. But people like local food because it has they think it has better flavor, it gives you more variety and diversity. There are simply things that you're not going to ship to those distances. There's less nutritional loss from shipping and processing, and you also don't breed things to be shippable and sustained under long distance travel. They're much more energy efficient. It has been calculated that 17% of our energy cost or energy use in the United States is for simply shipping our food sources from one place to another. Local foods strengthen local economies. They're safer food with less potential for contamination. It supports small, diverse enterprises, gives you a sense of community, and you know what your food cycle looks like if you're engaging in local foods. It gives you a deeper connection with nature and the phenology of food supply. There is a seasonality to things. Perhaps we're not supposed to have asparagus all year round. Promotes fairness and broad availability, and there are fewer exploitive wages as in industrialized food supply. This same report went through a series of challenges that you probably are all aware of, but one of the main challenges is this cold and seasonal climate that makes it somewhat more difficult to grow local foods. The opportunities are, however, that we can revitalize food preservation. There are ways we can solve the problems with indoor markets, extend the growing season using enclosures, think about solar-powered greenhouses or other enclosures, and indoor growing systems. Another challenge that was mentioned in local food supply is that of ensuring a large enough supply, large and sustained supply over time, so that restaurants and people can begin to count on the food sources. And there are several opportunities that provide solutions. People are talking about food hubs to aggregate smaller producers, commercial cooperative food processing, business incubators for small industries, and regional and local food distribution centers, all in aggregating our smaller supplies into larger ones as the industry grows. I will skip that one. Aquaculture has been a part of the traditional food landscape for a very long time. Right now, I think I'd like to be here with all this cold rain falling. But this is a traditional aquaculture facility that has worked for centuries in Hawaii. And Hawaii basically maintained its entire population based on freshwater or brackish water aquaculture. And this is one of the kinds of enclosures of freshwater input that was used, in fact, to supplement protein in this area. So this is a long-term, sustained food supply system. This is a plot showing the population of Hawaii over time, and this incredibly geometric rise in population is essentially sustained by aquacultural protein production. And it was sustained for a very long time until Captain Cook introduced a lot of diseases and killed lots of the Hawaiians with disease. But in any case, it was that protein supplement from freshwater aquaculture that allowed that population to grow. Northern European aquaculture is centuries old, and this is there's a terrific book on this topic, and this is a Dutch pond from Ingvar Svanberg's Historical Aquaculture in Northern Europe. Been going on for hundreds of years, although it's considered to be a sort of an interrupted cycle of aquaculture in Northern Europe. China is one of the biggest aquacultural producers in the world, and this has been going on essentially for millennia, and is also a massive source of protein to that population. So why not do something? Well, obviously we wouldn't want something like that in Minnesota. Thank you very much. But in any case, a terrific supply of protein. I had a few questions that I wanted to discuss and try and bring some speculation forward and some thoughts maybe to provide discussion topics. But I want to answer how much aquaculture is there in Minnesota, what's the potential market size in Minnesota, and Carol and Don and I will hopefully be working on this under a grant, but I have some data, some speculative data on this, and then also I'm rather keen to know what species we prefer in Minnesota, or which ones do we eat and cook versus what species are we offered by the market. So these are my three little research questions, since I can't really give any talk without presenting data. Okay, this is how much aquaculture was in Minnesota in 2012. This is from basically 2012 U.S. Census of Agriculture, the Minnesota version. The aquacultural industry was worth at that time about $11 million annually. And again, Don mentioned this earlier, but this big blue slice over here is bait fish production. It's about 53% of the revenue. Sport or game fish for stocking runs about 39%, with a smallish slice over here in terms of food fish and some ornamental fish. And the food fish were mostly trout at that time in 2012, according to the Census of Agriculture. So there is a substantial aquacultural industry, but it's principally oriented towards stocking sport fish and also creating bait fish. The next question I wanted to answer was what the potential market size might be for aquacultural food fish. So I started looking into consumption rates of fish in the United States and the world to see what potential elasticity there might be there. And this is what I found out. This is actually a pie chart showing the the protein sources used by people in the United States and the fraction of each of these foods, beef, poultry, pork, and so on, that actually are in the diet of people on average in the United States, seafood equivalent is this tiny green thing over here. So it's a very small amount, equivalent to 2.7 ounces per something rather. And I have these actually in annual figures in just a second, but a very small slice. If you divide this up by species in the United States, it's about 27% shrimp. So those of you who like shrimp seem to be able to become satisfied by this market. Salmon, about 16%. Canned tuna, about 15% of the fish consumption. Tilapia has garnered 9% of that market. Pollock and other cods, equivalent of about 11% together. Catfish, 4%, and so on. So really dominated by shrimp, salmon, and tuna in the overall diet. But the main thing is that protein intake in the United States is principally terrestrial origin, with very little fish ingested. Now, if you look at this, look at the United States compared to other places in the world average fish consumption is about 44 pounds per year. The U.S. average fish consumption is 15 pounds per year. A third, really, of the world average. How much elasticity is there in that diet would be a question that we should be answering eventually. Midwest fish consumption is about 10 pounds per year. So we're about 5 pounds under even the U.S. average in terms of fish consumption. So if you take this and say, well, we want to develop a market for fish in Minnesota, for aquaculture in Minnesota, the population of Minnesota is 5.5 million. And if you look at this difference, if you think maybe we can pump up fish intake in Minnesota up to the U.S. average, that would be about 5 pounds, 5 pounds for each of these 5.5 million people, or maybe there's a market in Minnesota for 27.5 million pounds of fish per year. Clearly, if you could increase that any more, then you could create an even larger market. That would be 11,000 tons annually as fish production, simply to bring Minnesotans up to the national average. So I think there's a lot of potential for that, for aquacultural production within Minnesota, and a market out there for those products. We are way underneath even the U.S. average, which is way underneath the world average in fish production, in fish ingestion. So the next thing I wanted to answer was the question we actually started with. What species do we eat and cook, and what species are we offered? So I don't know if you'll notice this walleye looks like a bass. Isn't it the most bass-looking walleye you ever saw? But it is a Ham's beer ad anyway. So I wanted to answer these two questions. What do people in Minnesota actually think of when they think of seafood and seafood and fish? And then also I wanted to see what people are actually offered when they're out in the marketplace in terms of seafood and fish. And I used the only resource I had at hand, which was Google. And so we'll see how this comes out. But now I'm really hoping Carol can forgive this. I try to use some variant of revealed preference analysis. So revealed preference analysis is, and I'm using a somewhat bastardized version of this, I'm so sorry, but revealed preference theory was developed by Paul Samuelson. It's a method for analyzing choices people make, and it's often used to compare the influence of policies on consumer behavior. This is often done by measuring things like travel time, and I've worked in that area a bit, travel time and patterns, or by things people decide to do. So the only source I had available to me really to answer this, since I couldn't put together an entire market study, was that I wanted to find out I wanted to look in to see what seafood recipes Minnesotans choose to publish on the internet. And so those Google searches are pretty easy to do and accessible to me in my office trying to write this talk. And then I wanted to see what kinds of seafood and fish you find on restaurant menus from places Minnesotans choose to go to. And so I'll show you those data now, and this is an extensive search that took me years. No, it actually took me a day, because that's all the time I had available. So when you analyze seafood recipes, it's a remarkable looking plot. You can't read this in the back, but this is a frequency histogram of the species mentioned in recipes published by Minnesotans or that refer to Minnesota. Walleye is number 1, and this is a frequency of about 50, and that doesn't even count a site that I found that is very obsessively says a site called My 100 Plus Favorite Walleye Recipes. So you could put that up into the second floor actually for walleye. So walleye is far and away the most popular fish. When people think of fish to cook or make a recipe or commit themselves to publish a recipe saying a recipe for Minnesota, fill in the blanks, it's almost always walleye. Next one is salmon. So those of you who like salmon, salmon is really an accessible fish and kind of harder to ruin when you're cooking it. Northern pike comes in next. And then lake trout, Cisco or lake herring, and those two bars are generally fueled by Minnesota Seagrant recipes on the web, published by Sharon. And then we have shrimp, and then whitefish, also Minnesota Seagrant driven, cod and lutefisk driven by those disgusting fishes. No, anyway, and then tilapia, panfish, crappie, sunfish, bluegill come in here, and then there's a long tail out here. We don't really come up against a solidly marine seafood until we get out here to crab, which is this. There's crab, halibut, snapper. So Minnesotans don't cook those things, or at least they don't publish recipes on those kinds of fish. It's all about walleye and salmon. Okay, so then if you compare this to what you find on in menus of, I did this around lunchtime one day, and I've never been more starved. I had to go through about 70 menus of restaurants, and now I have plenty of recommendations. In fact, it was I think it was 70 restaurant menus. 12 of those menus listed no fish whatsoever or seafood, which I found fascinating. I can't even imagine it. And these are Minneapolis menus. Shrimp and prawns come in number 1 by far. Almost everyone serves them. A terrific frequency of people serve shrimp. Next comes crabs, salmon, oysters, scallops, tuna, mussels, and then fish, nondescript. And there's also seafood down here somewhere, simply seafood, this and that, whatever they happen to have, whatever scraps they've got. We've got octopus. Octopus is on menus more frequently than trout, and way more frequently than walleye, which is right here. So there's a complete mismatch between what people see in menus and what they actually choose to cook themselves. And I would think that what people publish recipes about are more a closer reflection of what it is they really want to cook and eat, or at least pretend they cook and eat. Okay, so that's my Google search. So my conclusions from that basically are that aquaculture in Minnesota is currently oriented towards stocking and bait fish. There's a really large market potential for fish and seafood in Minnesota, and I think it's probably in the tens to hundreds of millions in potential revenues. It's much larger than the current aquaculture supply. And when Minnesotans think about fish and seafood, they think about it in terms of local species. You don't see that many marine species in recipes written by Minnesotans or food bragged about by Minnesotans. It's different, much different from the species offered by the import food supply network, which, and I think it's 95, I think Caird will talk about this in his talk, about what fraction is really just imported fish. It's much different. The preferences of Minnesotans are completely mismatched with what they're being offered, in my opinion. This is a wonderful cartoon. We have a new cartoon series that Sharon Moen has created based on the Our New Age, if you remember Our New Age of Science, that series that was published by Athelstan Spillhouse. We've created some new cartoons called Our New Age of Water. You can be seeing these on the internet, but one of them regards aquaculture. And the bottom line is that aquaculture has huge potential, especially if it is created in a way that's environmentally sustainable and environmentally friendly. So mission for this workshop is straightforward. It's to find tools, approaches, and science needed to help a successful food aquaculture industry in Minnesota. Here are the 3 intended outcomes, again, just to keep hammering on these. Prioritize species and strategies for Minnesota. Determine research needs and information gaps for successful Minnesota aquaculture. This I would like to spin into an RFP for Minnesota so that we can get the right science done that we need to build this industry. And finally, to identify and solve policy and regulatory hurdles to successful and sustainable Minnesota aquaculture. With that, I thank you very much. And this is going to be a great and fun workshop. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Any questions for John before?
Yeah. Sure.
Supermarkets versus restaurants, and then is there also the question of, is it a more philosophical, why buy walleye if I can go catch it? How are you going to overcome that as opposed to, I'm going to go buy something special that I can't get? So.
Yeah, I had I had more time, and we could do a preference analysis on these and try to figure out what people talk about, what they eat. It was my quick and dirty way of doing this. My sense is, as I was looking at the restaurant menus, that most of the chefs in restaurants go to big cooking schools, and those are the fish that they're offered to cook. And so that's what they know how to cook. But that's just a cynical point of view, perhaps. It may also be that those are the things that they can get from Cisco or from whatever supplier. I don't know who supplies fish directly here or seafood, but from that may be what's in their supply network. And so they're not going to try to cook something they can't get. I haven't, when I was a professor at McGill University, I taught a course in resource ecology, and there I had students go out into the fish markets and we'd analyze what the supply looked like, and we'd look to see what preference was in different kinds of markets and so on. It'd be really fun to do. That'd be the kind of research I would love, because you could bring it all home and cook it and have parties with your friends. But I don't know the answer to that. My guess is, though, that it has a great deal to do with that sustained supply that they can count on, because they don't have to change their menu sort of every day. And if you travel in Europe, you find that menus change every day. They handwrite them, and you get whatever is best and freshest. I like that approach, but I think we've gotten into this this grind, basically, of here's something I can count on, here's something we know how to cook, here's something I can teach the sous chef how to handle, and we know that this stuff is going to come in the door and go out with the customers. I think that goes to this question of how do we aggregate perhaps small aquacultural suppliers together into a network that can offer a sustained supply to supermarkets and restaurants and and get into that supply network. I think I have no idea how that all works, but I know some of you probably do here.
I was going to offer, I went to, between undergraduate and graduate school, I went to cooking school for 3 months in France, and one of my chefs owned a seafood restaurant, like a 2 or 3 star seafood restaurant. So I'm happy to help with restaurants and chefs.
Excellent, yeah.
You guys get that down in the notes? Any other questions you have?
Yeah, please.
I'm wondering what insights you have into different ethnic and cultural preferences, frequencies of fish consumption, types of fish, and also across socioeconomic spectrum.
It is hugely variable, and there is a wonderful market on University by Dale. I've forgotten the name of it, something like Star Market or Sunset Market or something. They have the biggest seafood section I literally have almost ever seen in my life. And I have no idea how many species are down there, and there are things in there from all over the world. And I know that different cultures you know, like Italians and Portuguese, for example, will demand different kinds of fishes. Minnesotans, sort of the Hamsbeer Minnesotan seems to want walleye, and we don't have a big supply for that. It is really hugely variable. I spent 20 years in Montreal, and it was incredible. The different areas even of the city would have very different kinds of things. I think cultural diversity is terrific for diet diversity, in my opinion.
John,
Don.
It seems axiomatic to me, and maybe this is a lowbrow thought, but just reflecting on my own experience, when I go to a restaurant and order something, I don't order an item that I have at home.
Yeah.
Something that I have a recipe box full of. I want something that is different, and so with the only frozen processed shrimp that's currently available, that doesn't make a great meal. You wouldn't have a big recipe box full of something that requires frozen shrimp. But with the growth of shrimp in the market, that I would imagine the recipe box would start to fill up if it became an everyday thing you would have. And so I'm just wondering about that, the chart, the histogram that showed the differences. They cross their inflection point somewhere in the middle. That I don't know if the restaurant's research tells me as much as I need to know about whether we're ordering something from the menu that we don't usually get, as opposed to something that we normally get.
Right, I think that's an important point. When I go to a restaurant also, I will try to order a preparation that I haven't tried yet, even of the same. You know, how many times do you order some sort of beef or some sort of pork, always cooked in sort of a different way that maybe I don't know how to do or I haven't done. So there is, I think, you know, it's not only to order a species that's different, it's a different preparation. Carol Russell could tell us probably 59 ways that are better to do this than the way I chose to do it. You know, what I wanted to do is get a snapshot into what people in Minnesota think of as fish and seafood. And that was the way I could think to do it. I'll bet there are terrifically better ways to do that, but I bet the answers wouldn't be a lot different. And also we're looking at people who go to fancy restaurants in Minneapolis versus people who put things on the internet, which are really different populations too. You know, but you know, a lot of producing markets has to do with selling to non-consumers. So that's the way you really build innovative industries, is to sell to those people who aren't consuming the thing already. So basically, we have people who think of yellow perch, panfish, and walleye as fish. And they are probably not, maybe on average, are not as big a restaurant consumers, and maybe that's where a market can be built. But I think that's some of the kind of stuff we need to know in order to figure out how to make profitable food fish aquaculture here.
So before the next question, let me just say, part of these workshops is always training the people who are at them. If you could say your name when you first start talking, then these guys who are recording can get, you know, and have an idea of who's talking. And then make sure you're talking to the whole group so everybody can hear. I don't know if you can hear very well in the back, that last one. Okay?
Michael had
a couple more questions.
Michael had a question back here.
Good morning again. Michael Zabel with True Shrimp. Just to give you a little bit of research that we have, that shrimp is one of the highest consumed seafoods in America. Every man, woman, and child consumes nearly 5 pounds of shrimp. That's more than salmon. That's more than tilapia. Maybe walleye consumption per capita is greater in Minnesota. I don't know. I don't have a number for cod either. But shrimp has steadily grown over the last 3 decades in consumption per capita. It has stalled out in the last 10 years, largely not because we don't like shrimp, but because the supply has stalled out significantly. The other thing, is you read my little dossier, I'm a veteran of the Schwan Food Company. Jessica and I both, and I was there for 22 years as a marketer of food. And we did extensive research in my time as a marketer on Schwan's Home Service, which markets seafood. And we could not understand why we couldn't sell more seafood. We had a broad spectrum of products, frozen, yes, but very carefully selected. And don't underestimate that the American consumer is terrified of preparing it. That's what we found out in all of our research. That and ladies, you're not going to like to hear this, so brace yourself. America has lost its cooking skills. And if you don't, and our research found out that if we don't put that recipe in with the product and get people to learn how to do it, they wouldn't consume the seafood because it's so expensive. It was an extensive research project that we did. This would be 10, 15 years ago. But they didn't know how to make it. They didn't know what to do with salmon. They didn't know what to do with it. So as you think about fish, keep that in mind.
Yep, yep. It's the whole chain, really. I was going to call it a food chain, but then I'm an ecologist, so that it's a chain, a supply chain, and getting it to the consumers and getting it prepared, and that's what fuels demand. But I think another part, Michael, that might be important here is that people are aware that the import market is gigantic, that we're importing huge amounts of seafood, including shrimp, from China. And I think many people are very wary of the things that get imported from places that are far away. And Minnesota has this brand of clean and fresh and nature. And Minnesota-grown anything would seem to overcome some of those barriers, perhaps. So that branding as a Minnesota-grown product, I think, would probably be really important. And
First, Michael wanted to add something
Okay.
I could tell, and then we're going to come over here to Henry, and then we'll go back to you, and then we'll be plenty out of time.
80% of the shrimp is imported. Over 80% from Indochina and Ecuador. Only 20% of our shrimp is wild caught or landings from the Gulf. A lot of people have the misconception that the shrimp came to the ocean, and it didn't.
Yes, Henry Drews, Minnesota DNR. For all those interested in walleye, point of reference, and I didn't see that in your slides, John, was the Red Lake Band of Chippewa sustainably harvest wild-caught walleye from the upper and lower Red Lakes to the tune of 800,000 pounds of walleye a year. And they have a very active marketing program, and all those fish are gobbled up all over the Midwest,
Yeah.
with markets as wide as the state of New York. So.
yeah, I didn't have a source really for commercial fisheries, which is there's the assumption that's made that Minnesota doesn't have much in the way of a commercial fishery. Certainly the coast of Lake Superior has a terrific commercial fishery too. Those data weren't in here. I was really concentrating on aquacultural products, but certainly there is other fish that is supplied. Yeah, one of the beautiful things about moving to Duluth was the availability of incredibly great lake trout, whitefish, and a variety of other species. It's fantastic. I think probably fish consumption in the Duluth Superior area is probably a little higher than 10 pounds per year, like double probably. But
And we have, we'll take one more question.
Yeah, Ilsa versus.
What was your name again?
Ilsa versus, yeah, I also forgot to say I have a consulting business called One Health, One Water, One Health, so let's get that out. Just kind of a little quirk back to you, so when you said to the women, that were worried, does that mean that men don't even know how to cook? Okay.
yeah, that's right.
The whole market there
Yeah.
between the men too. So.
Yeah,
No, but I also want to say in terms of just another marketing tool when you talked about the percentage of seafood coming in inspected is just marginal. So I know I have friends who USDA, the veterinarians, and so I think in terms of only like 1% of things coming in get inspections.
Yeah.
Alex and Nick might know a little better percentages, but again, some people don't know that's another selling point.
I agree, and the DNA analyses that have been done on fish served in restaurants frequently finds that there's really no correspondence between what's written on the menu and what you're actually getting. And I think that goes to this supply chain length. It's incredible to me that average food supply to the Midwest comes from 1,500 miles away on average. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And when you transport anything that distance, all kinds of stuff can happen to it over that. And that's one of the reasons I think people are I think they probably pay a premium to have something locally grown, because you know who raised it or where it came from, and you know that it's actually raised under some kind of controlled and probably healthful conditions. So I think that just increases the potential for building a food fish a market here. And I think I'm getting the hook, so I'll get out of here.